This webinar is really going to focus on what you can do with your information from your bid after you win the bid or after you complete the bid. I've always had this long-standing opinion that people don't do enough with that information. The tendency is I finished the bid, I either got the bid or I didn't, and that's it. And even if you get the bid, a lot of people don't go back and use that information. So that's what we're going to talk about today: is how you can utilize that information in running your jobs and in developing strategies and help you in bidding future jobs. So we're going to touch on a few of those topics here today. So one of the first ones you need to know is obviously if you won the bid, how much you won the bid or lost the bid by. And another little issue that always irks me a little bit here too is sometimes it's difficult to get the bid results. And that's always when I suspect a little bit of hanky-panky if the people you bid the job to aren't willing to tell you, what the low bid was relative to yours, then I think probably they're not shooting real straight with you. You have that right to know, if you were $1,000 high or $10,000 low or whatever the numbers are. That's valuable information to you in determining whether you want to bid that kind of job or whether you want to bid that kind of job with that kind of customer. You can also look at that as a percentage. How much were you under or over percentage-wise? Sometimes that's a little bit different perspective than just the dollar amount that you won or lost the bid by. Obviously, depending on the scale of the job, the percentage may be a little more informative. I think it's really important to look at the size of the job, not only in figuring out what you're going to do in future jobs, but the size of the job has a lot to do with things. You can look at the difference between doing $10,000 jobs or $100,000 jobs. Typically, if you can make the same gross profit, you'd rather do the $100,000 job. The other factor similar to that is the difficulty of the job. You want to look back at your bids and say, are we doing a lot of really difficult bidding a lot of really difficult jobs that are really small? That's not the ideal scenario, and not that you can always determine that, but you'd rather be bidding jobs that are on the easier side and on the larger side, because it just takes less of your resources, less of your overhead to run them and complete them. So let's talk a little bit about where this information would come from in EBM. So when you bid a job in EBM, first of all, there's a bid log here on the taskbar on the left. This will have a record of the jobs that you've bid. Now, when you complete a bid, you can go in and mark it as either active because you won the bid, or R for rejected if you didn't get the job. P means it's still pending. They haven't determined who's going to do the job. So the EBM program has a little log here. But what I would suggest doing is just developing a simple spreadsheet. Let me see if I can find the right one here with a bid log. Now, this is just a short version of it. Obviously, you need to get a lot more information in here to make it useful. I've only got 4 sample jobs. By the time you get up to 20, 30 jobs and keep going from there, that's when the information gets really valuable to you. But what I would have in my bid log, this is just a simple spreadsheet. You don't even have to make it into a spreadsheet. You can just do it on a Word document. But you would want to have the winning bid, your bid, the percentage of markup that you put in the job, and the cost of the job. Then you also want to have the dollar markup and how many dollars you were over and under on the bid. And then you'll see down here in the totals that information starts to give you some patterns. Negative numbers here mean that you were under the low bid. Same thing on the percentages. I also think it makes sense to categorize the jobs. Let me come back to this in just a minute. Let me just continue with the PowerPoint. So there's where the type of job comes into play. And you can create your own categories here. On my spreadsheet, I've categorized them as either C for commercial, R for residential, I for industrial, and O for other. Now, you want more categories, less categories, that's fine. Another category is the type of the job, might be whether it's a new job or a remodel job. And then finally, I already mentioned the difficulty of the job. Now, this is very subjective. You can have your own scale here. 1 is easy and 3 is difficult. Um, and then again, the size of the job, you can have your own categories. I typically think of a small job as being less than 50,000. I think of a medium-sized job as being $50,000 to $150,000 job, maybe up to 200,000, and then a large job being higher than that. I also think you should look at the total number of bidders. Again, my personal opinion is that it could very easily be a waste of time to bid jobs against more than 5 or 6 competitors. What's going to happen there is that, you know, obviously the company that makes the most mistakes is the one that's going to win the bid. So if you look back at your bid log here and you see that certain types of jobs or certain customers you're bidding to, you're bidding against a lot of competitors, there may not be a lot of reason to even do that. Now, sometimes you have to bid a job just to keep your foot in the door with the customer. You know, they're bidding the job and they need somebody to give them an electrical bid. But, you know, that shouldn't go on too long. You know, you don't want to be bidding against too many competitors because, like I said, again, they're either going to get the bid because they made a mistake or because they were just desperate for work. And neither one of those are the kind of things you want to be wasting your time with. Talked a little bit about the size of the job already. Again, you can look at your own company. Everybody's size classification is going to be a little bit different. You know, if your average job right now is $50,000, then a large job to you is, you know, probably over a $200,000 job. If your average job is 200,000, then obviously you need to look at it based on the kind and size of jobs you're doing. And the whole point here is to be able to look back and see what's working. You know, what strategies are going to be helpful in the past. Like I said, you need to get at least 20 or 30 results into that log before you can really start to analyze it very, very well. So, and you can go back to old bids. You don't have to start today with all your future bids. You can go back at least a couple of months and look at your results, go back to the customer, and if you don't know the winning bid, find out. They should be willing to give you that information. Now, as far as using the information to run your job, EBM gives you some really good information. Let me flip back to EBM for a minute. So one of the things it gives you in the job totals is the budgets or the estimate for the different phases of the job. So if I click on the number of hours here, it tells me how many hours I have allocated to each phase. Now this report comes out of the program automatically. You don't have to set up the job with sections or breakdowns. It automatically will give you a phase report with your budget of hours per phase. So this has two values to it. One is to track the job and at the end know whether you came out under or over budget. Again, you could do that on a spreadsheet. I'll just show you a simple example here. So here's an empty spreadsheet. These are the EBM phases: underground feeder rough in, that's what UFR stands for. FA would be fire alarm, LT is lighting. I just abbreviated the phases that are already in EBM. And then as you plug in the numbers, the spreadsheet will start to fill out. And I would do one of these on every job. You can keep track of the number of hours used. So if I plug in the number of hours, this is AFR, that's above ground feeder raceway. So let's say I've used 50 hours. It'll tell me here that I have 34 hours remaining. I've used 60% of my budget and I've got 40% left. So at the end of the job, you'll have some numbers down here for the totals. So if you're not tracking your jobs now, I know a lot of our customers don't. Start by at least tracking your hours, your total hours for the job. Look back at the end of the job, and if you bid the job with 1,200 hours and it came out at 1,100, you did okay, you did well. If it came out at 1,300, you didn't do so well. And then start breaking it out by phase, because that's going to tell you where the problems are. Now, every job costing program out there does that. If you don't have a job costing program, then just make yourself a little simple spreadsheet here like this. QuickBooks does it. We have a sister company called Job Power that's very geared towards job costing, even much more so than QuickBooks. Uh, and there's some high-end packages out there too, Dexter Chaney and Foundation. There's several of them out there. And EBM actually has integration with those. Let me just step over to that for a second. So when you're in the job total screen here, there's an export data button down here. And these are the options you can have to export the data to. Computer ease, so whether it's for project management like eSub, uh, QLink would be the export to QuickBooks. I mentioned Dexter Chaney. So these are some of the more popular, most of these are high-end programs. The other thing you can do in the job extension, there's another option here. This is to export all the raw data. Everything in the job extension can be exported to just a plain text format. Another company we worked with is called Estimate Guard. That is an online job cost tracking just mainly for labor. So it's online, and it does the same kind of thing my little spreadsheet did that I showed you, but it's online, so you can access it from anywhere. You can get an internet connection. Okay, so back to the information in EBM again. So from day one, you want to use that information to help you plan your manpower. So again, when I click on the labor hours here, it breaks it out by phase. I see that I've got 251 hours budgeted just for my branch wire. Now you can convert those numbers to the number of days. In this report, actually, it tells you how many hours you need for the different categories of workers and how many days it would take. But all you have to do to calculate the number of electricians you need is take the number of hours, and if you have a two-man crew, divide that by 2. That means you should be able to do the above ground raceway in about 30 hours. So again, these are great numbers to budget with. I think they're good numbers to give your crew as far as a goal. Let them know how many hours you have budgeted. Not telling them what their goal is just like giving them a open checkbook. They won't be as motivated to actually try to keep the job under budget. And that's something you could also consider some incentives. And it doesn't have to be a big bonus. It could be a $100 gift certificate to Amazon or something like that. The nice thing about that too is that you can kind of get around the whole taxable aspect of it with the gift certificates. Usually those are not considered taxable or not reported, that kind of thing. So those kind of things can be really valuable motivations. You say, hey, you come in 10% under the budget on the hours here, you're going to get a $100 gift certificate to Amazon or Walmart or whatever. So what my little spreadsheet did there, and what all of the job costing programs do, is they track the estimated material and labor versus the actual. That's really the bottom line. And my opinion too is that tracking material is certainly important, but not nearly as critical as tracking labor. You need to know at the end of the job how your estimate was as far as labor, and that helps you determine if you need to adjust the numbers in your estimating system. If you come out consistently over budget on your lighting hours, then you need to adjust the system. EBM has some very easy tools to do that. You could even go in and just say, raise all my labor units on my lighting by 10% or whatever the number is. You don't have to manually go in and change each item. Just one thing related to material, a lot of people don't know about these reports in EBM. Just don't stumble on them. For example, when you take off your feeders, the feeder module has its own report on the materials you need. So rather than go to your job extension and try to figure out which items were taken off as feeders, you can run this report here, and it gives you a breakdown of the feeders, of the feeder material. So again, this really has nothing to do with your bid per se, but it can be very useful. 2 months down the road and you're ready to start ordering material for feeders. The people in the field need to verify the links. You don't want to order too much conduit or wire. Certainly don't want to cut the wrong amount of wire or order the wrong amount of wire. Those need to be field verified. So these numbers give you something to verify with the field conditions. Hopefully it's a good it's a good report that your numbers are accurate, but you can't control that. Sometimes they get out in the field and they find out there's no way to run that feeder the way that the estimator had figured, and you have to start looking at alternatives on that. And again, related to phase or tracking labor, the phases, a lot of people call them job cost codes just for that reason. And they're typically separated into the type of material. A few years ago, 2-3 years ago, we created new phases in EBM. Let me just show you those real quick. So depending on when you bought your program or depending on whether you changed over your database, these are the phases we switched over to a couple of years ago. Your phases might be a little bit different, but we separated basically the raceway into feeder versus branch and above ground versus underground, because those are important distinctions. The rest of the phases are pretty similar to what they always were. And again, these happen automatically in the background. When you take off 2-inch EMT, it's going to go into above ground feeder raceway. Actually, we started 1.25 and above, automatically goes into above ground feeder raceway. I think the wire starts at number 8 and above is going to be feeder wire. So I guess part of my theme here today is start tracking your jobs, not only for the bids results to help you to formulate strategy for bidding future jobs, but to know where you're at as far as performance in the field, and if you need to make adjustments either in your estimates or maybe in how you're running the jobs. I just want to finish up with just some comments about training. To get some of these things out of your estimating program, you need to be fully trained. The information's all there. You need to know how to extract it and review it and use that information. As far as getting familiar with these concepts and practices, start with small jobs. You don't have to take a $800,000 job and analyze it. I'd rather have you take half a dozen $25,000 jobs and start by tracking those. It's a lot easier to get the procedures in place on small jobs. It's also a lot easier to bid a small job. So practice with small, simple jobs. I know that sounds pretty common sense, but I know there's always a tendency to people want to jump in and I got this $1 million job, I need to track it and I need to get on top of it. Well, if you haven't practiced on the small jobs, jumping into the big one and without that practice will be frustrating and dangerous. And you can always go back and re-estimate jobs you've already bid. I know there's always a tendency to want to move on, to want to do things that are going to be helpful with future sales, future business. But if you've got some jobs and you've got the time and availability to rebid some jobs, that could be very insightful. We always keep coming back to the importance of using estimating software to do these kinds of things, because if you're not, you're going to have errors in your estimate that are going to make the information much less valuable. Estimating programs reduce the errors, they're faster, the number crunching is quick and easy. And again, I keep coming back to this. Use your estimating program on all sizes and all types of jobs. Don't get don't fall back into the attitude that well, it's a small job, it isn't worth my time to put it into the program. Absolutely, it's worth your time, because you're going to save time, you're going to make less errors, and you're going to have that information to help you analyze all of your bids. So Derek, do we have any particular questions I should address? Has anybody thrown anything
Yeah.
out there that go ahead.
What's a standard percentage for overhead and profit?
Again, that's a tough one. First of all, I kind of look at overhead and profit as markup. It doesn't really matter too much whether you call it overhead or profit. If you mark it up 15% overhead and 10% profit, that's a 26% markup. It doesn't matter if you go the other way, 10% overhead and 15% profit is still a 26% markup. So that's why it's important, I think, to keep track of that markup in relationship to your bid success. If you're finding that you're consistently putting a 26% overall markup and you're getting very little success, obviously you may need to adjust that downward. So, and again, I can't answer that for any particular or a general situation. It really has to be focused at your bidding results. It has to be focused at the kind of jobs you're bidding, the number of competitors you're going against, the difficulty of the jobs. Those all come into play. And if I said that 10 and 10 was a standard overhead and profit, I think I would be doing you a disservice. You could certainly start, and I would probably start a little bit on the high side. You don't want to start marking up too low and getting every job you bid. On the other side of it, you don't want to be too high and not get any jobs. But there's a happy medium, and there's it's an art. That's one of the arts of estimating, is knowing where that sweet spot is. And again, that goes back to the question about backlog. If you've got a lot of backlog, you can be a little fussier with a little more a little less aggressive with your bidding. So yeah, that's a great question, but it's really hard to generalize on an answer there.
All right. Here's another. This one's by Richard. How do you estimate man hours on jobs you haven't done before? Example, replacing lights. If I estimate 1 hour and it takes 2 hours, how do I make up for that extra time after the job is over?
Oh, you can't, but again, it's all based on experience. Demo work is one of the harder things to estimate. If you've got to replace a light, it's really a two-step process. You got to take out the old one, you got to put in the new one. So it's, by definition, it's going to take more time than just figuring out how long it's going to take to put the new one in. As a rule of thumb, I would take double. If you got to take it out and put something in new, and your normal labor factor unit is an hour, I would figure 2 hours to take it out and put it back in. Now, EBM has demo data in it, so you can go in and say, I'm taking out 10 switches, and I'm taking out 500 feet of pipe, and I'm taking out 2,000 feet of wire, and it'll give you the number of hours based on inputting that information. But I think you're going to typically find that it takes just about as long to take something out as it does to put it back in. Now, a lot of the time, demolition is done by somebody other than the electrical contractor too. Sometimes the general contractor or just a crew of laborers will come in and remove the electrical materials on a demolition that the electrical contractor has safed off, turned off the power to. So yeah, it's not an easy thing. Bid and remodel work, that's why that's one of the categories I have to track, is bidding remodel work is a more difficult estimate, and it's a more difficult job by nature because you don't know what you're getting into nearly as much as you would on new construction.
Yep, that makes sense. Next question. When using an outside estimation company, can EBM takeoffs be downloaded to our EBM files for final review and finalizing the bid?
If they do the estimate on EBM, yes. So if you've got a freelance estimator, an outside service that uses EBM, they can just send you the job and you can upload it into EBM and you're good to go. You can tweak the numbers, you can change quantities, change markups, change labor units, rates, etc. Yeah, you can. It's fully compatible to bring it in from a third party into your program. There's a backup routine on the job file menu, but you can back up the job. They can send it to you by email. They're not large job or not large files. They're easy to email. And then on that same menu, you'll see restore, and you can bring it into your software.